Hey, we're here. I got a little extra time on the job, so I thought I'd run through some of the Basal anchors, start from the most basic and work our way up, and just go through a little bit of the differences in them, just like little itty-bitty differences that can make a big difference in the end. So we got our line already set in this tree we're going to prune. I almost always, probably at about 95% of the time, I use Basal anchors. It's my preferred style. But know the positives and the negatives before you start using them. Negatives being that we increase forces at the top. Positives being that we can back them up and don't have to rely on an isolated limb. I'd go as far as saying you should never isolate a limb when using a Basal tie-off. And then also another negative is that you have the side of your rope being loaded that isn't right in front of you. So you have to keep in mind that, where that is in the tree at all times. So here we go. Most basic would just be a simple running bowline, backed up in some sort of form. I use the Yosemite tie-off. A couple of half hitches afterwards would be acceptable too. So this is simple. It takes no extra gear. So there's Yosemite tie-off. Loaded. Positives, super simple. Negatives, in this form it's not rescuable or lowerable. But if I add an alpine butterfly, now we can attach a second rope or something else to change this into a lowerable system. And I would say if you're using a running bowline, this should always be incorporated into it. All right, so that's the most basic. Requires no gear, super simple. So we're going to take it one step from there. One of the advantages of using a separate rope is that we can now control how much rope is in the system. So I'm going to start with the most basic. One of our other climbers here, this is his kit, and it's just a simple rope, and we tied a carabiner on the end with a scaffold knot so it's super secure. So again, this allows for some adjustability in the climbing rope. If we're climbing a 50-foot tree and have a 200-foot rope, now we don't have to use all of it. So what I did here is, since we have this fixed on this end, I tied an alpine butterfly that I can pass this through and attach it to. And now we can have just enough rope into our system and use a lowerable system here, either like a munter's hitch, or we could use a figure 8. The important thing is that the ground crew knows how to operate the system. You, the climber, are not going to be rescuing yourself. So your ground crew must be trained in whatever system you use. One of the other downsides of this system is what we call the flop test. As you load and unload this can fall. There's a lot of movement there. So that's one of the downsides. It's going to be very hard to pull this super tight using a knot like the alpine butterfly. So if we want to take it one step further, we're going to use an adjustable system so we can pull that tight. So over here I have the system that I use, and it has a little bit of changes, and I'll go through what they are. So this one, I can incorporate a ring or a rigging plate, piece of hardware, and this creates better interfacing as I don't have rope running on rope. Now there's two ways you could set this up. I've seen some individuals, this has a prusik loop on it that makes it adjustable so that we can take a lot of slack out of it. I've seen some individuals pass this through it. Now we still have that rope on rope. I'm not against that, but the other downside is that as you pull on this, as I turn this around, as you pull on this, the tree can actually tend the prusik. So we need a stopper knot behind it. I've seen one time where a climber was going through, had forgot the stopper knot, and when he got down, this end had worked itself up the tree about 10 feet. So even on a lowerable system, it wouldn't have been able to be reached. The other part of that is that it was creeping through his entire climb, which is a concern. So when I set this up using a prusik like this that's adjustable, whether it be a ring or a piece of hardware, I'm going to pass that through and then use a carabiner, and I girth hitch it so that it's always going to be positively loaded. No matter if there's slack in the system or not, when it comes back, it's going to stay like that. If I was to just pass it through and there's a little bit of slack, the carabiner could get twisted and end up side loading. So the first thing I did is set this hitch. Now that I'm loading the hitch is being pulled into the tree, and there's not that concern, but we'll still back it up with a half hitch just to double ourselves up. More backups the better. So again, we could run like a figure 8, a munter. My preferred one is the Basal rig. It's very identifiable as a Basal rescue. It can be used for other applications, but I'd say this is the most commonly used one. It's also super simple to use. So with this, again, we have a lot of adjustability in the system, in that I can install the rope putting only as much as I need into the system. Now, a couple of things I want to watch with this is that the handle always remains on the outside, and I can tell you already this is backwards because the carabiner gate should be loaded against the spine being loaded against the tree as well. So those are the two things with this, is that the carabiner, the spine's being against the tree, and that the handle is away from the tree. Otherwise, in a situation, this could get caught behind it where it stays open up. And the great thing about the rig is that if you let go, it'll automatically lock, and then it has a further locked position in that. So real quick, just ran through a couple Basal tie-offs that I use. There's one other that I use that's a little bit more complex, using just the rope. It's called a minimalist lowerable system. I think it's on my YouTube channel. You can look that up if you're interested. Thanks, guys.